Anyone else? I want to give you just another moment. If anyone wants to chime in, if not, that's okay. How do we solve the problem? Well, it seems like that's been a pretty good. Okay. Yeah. Okay. 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 We're gonna. I'm running out of rooms. We're gonna leave it there. And that was a humorous added. I like that. So how do we solve the problem? So we talked about some things, whether it's pray more, root cause, at home, we're asking if the sin or not, turn over to God, ignore it, hope it goes away. So I assume that most of you assumed that when I wrote the question, how do we solve the problem, you're thinking about how do we solve the problem of gun violence or mass shootings like what happened in Texas. I agree that is certainly a problem, and that is certainly something that we need to ask and think about. And I think that some of these things can definitely talk to that and speak to that. Something else that happened this week that you guys may not be as aware of, I have not read the full reports yet, but the Southern Baptist Convention had a third party investigate some allegations that were made against some individuals on the executive committee nationally. So not here state level, not local level, but nationally. And the report of that was released this week. And it found various pastors and various churches to be guilty of sexual assault and not handling allegations that were verified correctly. And so it has been a rough week in general when it comes to the sins that are clearly on display in the world, whether that is within a church setting, whether that's within a secular setting, whether that is in any way, shape, or form. When we talk about how do we solve the problem, we can talk about mass shootings, we can talk about sexual violence in any way, shape, or form. We can talk about all sorts of things when we talk about this question. I think that no matter how we define the problem, which is very important, define the problem, I think we're going to find a few things in the scriptures tonight that could possibly cure any problem we would ever have. Now, I know that sounds ambitious, okay? I understand that sounds too good to be true. It sounds like I'm just selling something or peddling something, or it sounds like a hasty overgeneralization. But I submit, and I think we'll see that in just a moment, how that's possible. Praying more, I'm definitely not going to knock people praying more, because whenever we pray, we're asking for somebody who can do something about it to do something about it. Our politicians can talk and sit in committees and make even good policies and good decisions. But when they do make good policies and good decisions, if they do that with the absence of the leading of the Lord, they are just spinning their wheels. They're just spinning their wheels. We have to define what our problems are. In America, I think it's obvious that we have problems. I think some time ago, we were convinced that, we're America, we don't really have problems. If we do, they're small, they're minor, that's just a random thing. The events that we saw this past week is not a random thing. I remember Columbine when I was very young, somewhat young, I should say. I remember Columbine, that was like a big deal because that was like the first school shooting in the U.S. And now like they've just become a thing. It doesn't quite faze us like it used to. I heard one talk show host saying that there was over 200 mass shootings this year in the United States. And I was like, that's crazy. So we need to find the problem, though. We need to understand what it is. Root cause, I think that's very important. Why? What are the factors that cause things to happen the way they do? I think there's a lot of truth at home. Listen, this cannot be a policy that we just say, we're going to make this rule in the Constitution and now everyone's just going to follow it, because we know how well people follow rules in this country. But it has to be, how are we caring for people in every single individual family? How is that happening? How do we find our responsibility when it comes to whatever the problem is? Sin is absolutely a problem. If we're going to talk about the root of all problems, we're going to have to talk about sin. Turning things over to God, I think that there is certainly a place for us to listen, God has a plan and we need to trust that at the end of the day, even if it's hard for us to see that. But I think God not only expects us to trust him, what we cannot know, but I think he expects us to act on what we can know. And so sometimes turning it over to God can be an excuse to not do anything. I don't think that that's how it was given today. I think that that's a very legitimate thing. We need to trust God, knowing that he's going to do what he wants to do. And then ignore it and hope it goes away. I think that's been a practice in various things, whether nationally in our country or whether that's just small things in our community. If we just ignore it, maybe it's really not a big deal. Maybe it will just go away. We would like for that. I'll tell you that does not work with the sin problem. And so it usually doesn't work very well with other things as well. So I titled today, or tonight's time, 2 commands that can save a lost world. I think we find this in Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12, I want to read from starting in verse 20, Mark 12, verse 28. Mark 12, verse 28. And so at this point, whenever we turn to Mark chapter 11, we are entering the final week of Jesus' life. So all of Mark 11 through the rest of the book of Mark is going to be talking about the final events in Jesus' life and his death and his resurrection. So whenever we come to this, there's this section during Jesus' final week where people ask him all sorts of questions. The religious leaders get together, and the Sadducees ask a question, and the Pharisees ask a question, and the scribe asks a question, and this religious leader asks a question. They're all trying to make Jesus look silly or ridiculous, or to stump Jesus, because he's got a large following at this point. And they are actually kind of afraid of how large his following could be. This is Passover. This is when thousands of people gather to Jerusalem. And so if he already has a substantial amount of followers, perhaps his movement is going to grow into something that Rome is going to pay attention to, and it's going to cause big problems for the religious leaders. And so they want to get rid of Jesus. And so for them, the first step is to make him look silly or ridiculous with a question. If he can show himself to not be able to answer something, then that's all the proof they need to start that slippery slope of, well, if he can't possibly answer this question, then he can't possibly be the religious figure you think him to be. And if he's not the religious figure he claims to be, then he's blasphemy and he deserves to die. And they will, of course, get to that conclusion one way or another. Well, during that time, one of the questions that is asked is this, is which commandment is the most important of all? Now, this is asked probably not sincerely in this moment. This is probably asked in the essence of, listen, there's all these commands in the Old Testament that we think of the 10 Commandments. But in addition to those, if you read the book of Leviticus, which most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we read through Genesis and Exodus, and then we kind of skip over that to another book that we think is a little bit more enjoyable in the Old Testament. But if we were to read the book of Leviticus, there's more than just the 10 Commandments. There's lots of rules, lots of regulations. And so they're thinking, if we ask Jesus, what's the most important commandment? He's going to look silly, because if he picks something, it's going to look like, oh, well, then what about this over here? You're completely ignoring this over here. And so how does Jesus answer this question? They try to stump him, and of course, Jesus is Jesus. And so he answers wisely, profoundly, with more wisdom than we can ever imagine. It speaks to his day. It has spoke from that day throughout all the days until now, and it speaks well today. In Mark chapter 12, starting in verse 29, it says, Jesus answered, "The most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Now the scribe, he's like, "You're right, teacher. You said it really well." And whenever he gives him that good answer, what we see is that Jesus tells him that he has answered wisely. He says, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." But no one asks him any more questions after this. We are told at the end of that part of Matthew chapter 12. So when I say that there's 2 commandments that can save a lost world, I believe that Jesus has mentioned them here. When he says to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, he says to love our neighbor as ourselves, he said these 2 commands are going to fulfill every other command given in the scriptures. You'll follow the 10 commandments if you follow these 2. You will follow all the book of Leviticus, essentially, if you follow these 2. I would submit to you, if we think about the problem of mass shootings in our country, we think of the problem of tremendous violence in that way, shape, and form. I would submit to you that we would not see that if everyone in our nation loved the Lord and loved their neighbor as themselves. I would submit that that would literally take care of that problem. I know that that is overly simplistic. I know that that doesn't deal with the systemic issues. It doesn't deal with gun control laws and regulations, and it doesn't deal with all those things. I understand that, and I understand the problem is big, and we must talk about it on a very serious level. But I submit to you, if every American citizen would learn to love God with everything that they have, and then to treat their neighbor the way they wish that they would be treated, we would not have that problem. I haven't met a person in my life yet that thought that mass shootings is how they would want someone else to treat them. I haven't seen it. I haven't met that person yet. Now, I've met people that have contemplated suicide. I have met people that have thought they deserved harm because that's what they had experienced in most of their life. But I've never met someone that thought that's what they wanted someone else to do to them. I haven't met that person yet. I haven't met a person that when they've really truly been exposed to the love of God hasn't understood that there is a now obedience expectation to care for other people. When they know what God has done for them, when they know the love that's been lavished on them through Jesus, that Jesus went to the cross for their sins, when they were sinners, when they were disobedient, when they were deserving of what Jesus experienced on their behalf. I haven't met people that have heard that and really understood it, that didn't also understand that they were then supposed to care for other people because of the care they had already received. And so I would submit to you, when we talk about problems in our world, especially the problem that we saw this week in Texas, that if people could really learn to love God, to understand who he is, to understand that he's worthy of our love, to love him with everything that we have, right? And that's going to be different for different people. I'm not going to be able to love him with a multi-million-dollar budget because I don't have that. But there are people that God has allowed to be in positions of authority that have that. And if those people love the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, it wouldn't be an issue how they use their resources. When we come to this is tremendous. And the people knew whenever they heard it, gosh, Jesus again answered in a way that we thought it'd just be impossible for you to answer this correctly. So since I'm not a politician, since I'm not on a education board and I don't have to play all of those political games, I know this seems overly simplistic. I know it does. But think for a moment, if a person was genuinely saved, and every single person in America was genuinely saved and loved the Lord and loved their neighbor, or sought to love their neighbor as they love themselves, this would not become an issue. We would have mass shootings down to zero. I submit to you that that is exactly what would happen. Now, where is that going to leave us? Well, I'll tell you that just in a moment. But before we get there, I know that this sounds too easy. I'm talking to an audience of people that I believe to be saved. Now, I'm not the one that lets you get into heaven, so you and Jesus better make sure you know that, okay, between the two of you. But I believe I'm talking to people that have made a profession of faith and are committed. You guys have been in Bible studies for I don't know how long. I've seen you and witnessed you for 7+ years, many of you. And so I would think that I'm talking to an audience that kind of gets what I'm talking about, okay? And so there's someone that may watch this or someone that may see this later, or the world at large who do not claim to have any kind of faith-based. They're going to be like, okay, that sounds really nice. That must be coming from a person who hasn't experienced much hardship in life. That sounds like a person who's had it easy. It sounds like a person whose life has been a bed of roses. That's just such an easy solution to a problem. They must live in a world that is different than the one in which we live in. They just have rose-colored glasses. Well, I want to submit to you that when we come to Mark earlier in chapter 12, Jesus knows full well the evil of this world whenever he gave that, the answer to that question. In Mark chapter 12, verses 1 through 9, we are told a parable This is a parable of the tenants. Now, we've seen other parables that talk about tenants where he hired some and he gave them the same wage for those he hired first, and those that came last, he gave them the same wage, and people were upset about it. That's not that parable, okay? It's a different parable. But I'm going to read to you, starting in chapter 12, verse 1. It says, "And he began to speak to them in parables." This is Jesus, of course. "A man planted a vineyard, and he put a fence around it, and he dug a pit for the wine press, and he built a tower, and he leased it to tenants, and he went into another country. When the season came, he sent his servant to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. And they took him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Again, he sent to them another servant, and they struck him on the head, and they treated him shamefully. And he sent another, and him they killed. And so with many others, some they beat, and some they killed. He had still one other, a beloved son. And finally he sent him to them, and he said, they will respect my son. But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And they took him, and they killed him, and they threw him out of the vineyard." He's going to pose the question at the end of it. He's like, well, what do you think the owner of the vineyard is going to do? He's going to come, he's going to destroy the tenants, he's going to give the vineyard to others. When we come to this parable, what we understand is that in the Old Testament, how God described the nation of Israel as if they were a planting that God had placed into the world. Mankind had sinned, they disobeyed God, Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. We've all been under sin since then, but God did something unique and special through Abraham and his descendants, the people of Israel. He put a planting into the world that was supposed to be a vine that would grow and produce fruits of righteousness that would point people to the light in the midst of darkness. They would point people back to what the world needed, which was a restored relationship with God. And so this parable is talking about God working and moving and preserving the nation of Israel. He grew them from a person into a great nation. He rescued them from Egypt. He gave them a promised land. They had towered walls. They had a great King David. They had prosperity for seasons. They had, God did all of that for them. And then God would also desire to use them to eventually reach the world as well. He would send prophets that would make prophecies about the coming Messiah. He would send prophets that would talk about eventual salvation of the Gentiles, so all nations of the world would be able to be blessed because of what God was doing in the nation of Israel. But whenever we come to this, he's also going to say that the people of Israel misused what God had given to them. He sends someone, in this we most likely refer to these servants that he sends as one of the prophets and how they mistreated the prophets in the Old Testament, some of which they beat, they shamefully treated, some of which they killed. And then, of course, eventually he talks about the son and he's referring to himself. He knows this is the last week of his life. He knows that when he comes, they are plotting to kill him as he shares these words. He knows it. So whenever we talk about a person who's trying to give us wisdom into the brokenness of the world, he says, just love God with everything you have and love your neighbor as yourself. This is not a person who is not well in tune with the evil of this world. When we take this parable for just a moment and just kind of whittle it down and see some of the highlights in it, I want to pull this out to you. And verse 3 says, they took him and they beat him. Okay, beating is not a way that we can think of as a pleasant thing in this world. The only way we can think of it as having a good outcome is if that's in the context of proper discipline. Okay, and even then we're not talking about any kind of physical abuse. But here is that they took him and they beat him. In verse 4, they struck him on the head and they treated him shamefully. Verse 5, him they killed, one of the servants, and so with many others. Some they beat, some they killed. Verse 7, let us kill him, the inheritance will be ours. Verse 8, they took him and they killed him. Now, the word kill appears multiple times in this parable. Beat and struck and shamefully treated occurs times in here. And they mention various servants, but then they say also many others. And so when we talk about this, we talk to a person who is well acquainted with the evil of this world. We talk to a person who's well acquainted with the desires of humankind to do whatever it takes for them to elevate themselves, even if that means killing other people, not thinking of them as if they're valuable or have any worth. We see this here. And so when Jesus says that we need to love God with everything, we need to love our neighbor as ourselves, he says this as one who understands the brokenness better than we do. It isn't a cheap answer. It isn't an easy answer even, but it is a good answer, and it's a right answer. He would come and live and die for us, that we might be able to understand the love of God. It says the love of God was demonstrated in this, so while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. When it talks about love in the New Testament, it talks about we know what love is because God sent his son into the world to be the propitiation for our sins. And so while Jesus is describing the evilness of the world, he is coming to display the greatest act of love the world has ever seen and will ever know. And so when he tells us to love God with everything and to love our neighbor as ourselves, this is a person who spoke what was truth and lived what was true. So it seems like an easy solution, but I promise you, if we would look at ourselves, regularly ask ourselves, today did I love God? And did I love someone else the way I want to be loved by God? If we ask ourselves those two questions every single day and strive to answer those with a yes, we will make more difference in this world than we could ever imagine possible. If we would just simplify to have I loved God today, have I loved him with everything I have, and have I loved someone outside of myself in that same way. So what do we do? What do we do? I know that sounds simplified as far as what I've given you so far, what Jesus said. It seems overly simplistic, but there's so much good truth in that. So I want to share two final things that do come from this portion of scriptures as well. One is from Mark chapter 12, but we'll save that for a second. The next one is from Mark chapter 13, verse 37. I want us to stay awake. Now, Mark chapter 13 is a parallel chapter to chapter 24 in Matthew. When we talked about chapter 24 in Matthew, it's talking about the end times, right? And the day of the Lord and, what's going to happen on those days and how the temple is going to be eventually be destroyed and all those. We would love talking about end times, right? We love talking about end times kind of stuff. So Mark chapter 13, towards the very end, in fact, the very last verse of Mark chapter 13, Jesus tells them, no one's going to know the hour or the day. No one knows that, only the Father. But he says, I'll read verse 20 or 36 and 37. It says, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. Now, what he is referred to, is meant by that, it goes back to verse 33. It says, be on guard, keep awake, for you do not know when the time will come. We need to be prepared. We need to stay awake as if we know all of human history is moving to a definite point at the end of time where all things are going to be done away with and we're going to have to answer to God for what we've done with our lives. We need to stay awake as if that is a constant truth on the edge of our minds. I wish that the young gentleman that decided to do what he did in the events this week knew that he is going to have to stand before Jesus one day and answer for the actions that he did this week. He's going to have to do that. And I don't imagine that's going to go well for him. I don't mean to say that flippantly. I don't mean to say that in a harsh tone, but I can't imagine that's going to go well for him. With all the life, all the days the Lord had granted to him. For all of the pages of scriptures that have been interpreted through history into the English language and available to him in probably a hotel room or probably from a local church or probably by maybe even a teacher that was a believer. Who knows what access he had or did not have, but he was not awake to the truth that his life would come to an end and he'd have to answer for his actions. But Jesus would not have us unaware of that. And one of the tragic things of the Christian life is we can become saved and become so distracted by all the other things that we need to do that we are almost asleep when it comes to why we're really here. We're almost asleep when it comes to what we're supposed to be doing, what God has placed us here to do, to love him with everything that we have and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so Jesus warns his disciples and he warns us. We must stay awake as to why we're here and what we're supposed to do. And I think that a final thing that he would give us is personal advice to each of us. Is, again, I'm not trying to answer this question from a political standpoint or from an education standpoint or from a civic standpoint, but I'm trying to answer it from a scriptural standpoint or from a biblical standpoint. From Mark chapter 12, one of the questions that was given to Jesus before we get to the great commandments that he shared with us was a question about the resurrection. And so the Sadducees came, and they don't believe in the resurrection, so they set up a scenario in which they thought Jesus would be stumped. And we looked at that when we looked at the Gospel of Matthew. But whenever we come across that, when Jesus kind of puts them in their places, he always puts people in their place because it's just how Jesus is. When we come to verse 24, Jesus says to them, he says, "Is this not the reason that you are wrong? Because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God." Now, I know that that's a specific statement made to that specific question that was given by the Sadducees, but I submit to you that that is a true statement. It's a principle that can be applied widely in our lives. When it comes to what's wrong in our culture and in our society, and there's no way, shape, and form we can look at the violence that happens in mass shootings and not call that wrong. There's no way we can do that. I don't see a politician today that doesn't agree that that is wrong, right? They may disagree on gun rights and different things of that nature, but they can all agree that what we witnessed and saw and experienced early this week is wrong. Even if these are people that also have a hard time with other moral decisions, they can tell you that what they saw is wrong. Jesus says in verse 24, "Is this not the reason you're wrong? Because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God." I submit to you that one of the main reasons why America is where we are today, not just America, the way the world is where the world is today, is because we do not know the words that God has already told us. We don't know them. We don't have a context that every person, every child in that school, even the shooter himself, was made in the image of God. He was made and designed on purpose by God to be able to reflect God's goodness in this world. But we don't teach that. I mean, the scriptures do. We as a church, I hope, do, right? But the world as a whole does not teach that. It's not okay to do that. It's not okay. That's just one truth in our culture that we do not know. We are raising generations of kids who do not believe that everything everything that surrounds us was made and created by a good and loving God. We remove him from the equation and we wonder why we're wrong. We wonder where things went wrong. He says the reason why you're wrong is that you don't know the scripture. You don't know them. You know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. And so the people he's talking to thought that they knew the scriptures very well, but they also were unaware of the power of God. Jesus was standing in front of them. Jesus was in front of them sharing these words. Jesus was also going to go within days to the cross to display the power of God, the power of love to forgive sinners, even making that available to the people that asked him these questions. Okay? So when we look at the mess of our world, we look at the mess of the problems that we have, we look at the world and we say, it's hopeless. I don't know how you can not watch a news segment today and not think, you know what, the world just seems hopeless. Well, maybe we as Christians are remembering the scriptures where we can recall something. We know that we're made in the image of God. We know we're supposed to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, strength, and we know we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, but we forget the power of God. We still live as if he can't do today what he's done before. How ridiculous of us, right? Paul would tell us that the same spirit that rose Christ from the dead lives in you. Let us not think that we cannot be agents to change the mess of this world. In fact, we're alive for that very reason. We still have breath today for that very reason and purpose. So I want to encourage you and close with these thoughts. Just to wrap up, there are two commands that Jesus gives us that can save our lost world. We are to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to tell that to other people. We're supposed to do it first, right? Look at ourselves, and then to love our neighbors as ourselves. Ask yourselves that every day. Have I done anything that reveals that I love God today? Have I done anything to love someone outside of myself today? Jesus knows evil in this world. He is well aware of it. It's not like a person that Jesus gave us the solution. He's unaware of the problem. He knows it. He knows it really well. In fact, he knows the root cause of the problem, right? He knows how to define the problem. And so I think good advice he would give to us is to stay awake, to stay awake. The messes of this world are found by the sin that is described in these pages. The solution is for the godliness that can be displayed in us if we will seek it. If we would pray and ask hard for that, he will give us that strength. We need to stay awake to that everyone is going to have a life that ends at one day. They're going to answer to God for that. We need to stay awake to that reality so that we can prepare people for that. And we need to learn the scriptures and the power of God. That there are things that we can find solutions to if we would just read other parts of the scriptures. It's like, it's just amazing when we think of what it is that God has provided there for us. And also to know the power of God. I know that that's something that Moses had to learn while he was out in the desert. Moses did not want to go to Pharaoh. And yet the power of God to work through Moses was to deliver a people of almost 2 million. Now, that's roughly the entire state population of West Virginia. And so I submit to you, I am one person, but this whole room is more than just one person to Moses, right? If God were to work and move through us as he desires, if we would just expect him to do so, who knows what he could do in our community? Who knows what he could do in our state? And who knows what he could do in the world? So I just want to encourage you with those things. So I know that this week has been a rough week. It has been a dark week. A discouraging week. If you haven't felt a little discouraged or depressed or shed tears over the mess, I don't know if you're fully human, because that's just how we are. And this world is so dark. But I hope that it does not overcome the light that's within us, because John tells us that the light has shown the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it, has not overcome it. Depending on the translation that you have. So I wanted to hopefully use some of the passages from our text this week to be an encouragement to you. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments on that before we close tonight? There's a lot of truth to it. Salvation should change our behavior. If it doesn't, it hasn't really happened. Anyone else, any thoughts tonight before we close? Yes, Gene. Who knows, Gene? Who knows? That may be a possible answer to a possible problem. That's something we could debate back and forth. There are, and they have indeed, on many occasions, held back violence. But those are questions that if everybody in America owns a gun, but everybody loved the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loved their neighbor as themselves, then no one would shoot anybody. Well, what? The world can't figure it out because they know not the scriptures or the power of God. Yeah. Well, guys, let's close tonight in prayer, and then I think there's still choir practice. We thank you for the ability to be together tonight, and Father, our hearts are heavy with the things that we have seen this week. God, we know that this world is just spiraling out of control, and you've told us that that's what's going to happen. Because, Father, we love so many other things other than you, and we don't love you with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, Father. The chaos we see day to day is what will continue to be. But God, I pray that as this world continues to be messier and messier, that, Father, our light would continue to shine brighter. And Father, this light is not ours. It is only ours if we have received you. God, I pray that we would stand on truth, that we would know your scriptures, we would know your power. And Father, we would stand on that in the midst of such dark and difficult times. Father, you've called us to do that. We are not the first generation of Christians that have been called to take a stand in difficult and hard times. And so, God, help us to draw encouragement from those that have went before us, and Father, to live faithful and obedient lives to you until you call us home. Help us to stay awake, Father, and to do your work while there is still time to do so. God, bless each person here tonight with whatever is needed for the next day, the next week ahead, encouragement, resources, whatever, Father, provide. Be with choir practice in a few moments, Father, as they sing praises to you. May it not seem odd to be able to praise, even in the midst of such difficulty and frustration. God, we thank you, and we look forward to a day where these problems will never be, where these things will never have to cross our mind. There will be no more tears and sorrow there. God, we thank you for the promise of that. We ask these things tonight in the name of Jesus, and amen.
Everybody needs to remember tomorrow for the year 2022 is the day of ascension.
The day of ascension?
Yes.
Okay.
Tomorrow.
Oh, that's cool. I don't think I knew that. Miss Price, it's the day of ascension